Okay, so welcome to our meeting here tonight. This is the Popular Astronomy Club meeting for February. And I'm going to try to keep up with people that are getting in late here. Tonight, I think what we'll do, we've got some items to talk about later. And I'm going to put those off until later. And the main thing we want to do is have our program for tonight. And so again, everybody, welcome to the Popular Astronomy Club meeting for February. This is the February 8th meeting. Tonight, our guest speaker is Mr. Larry Boyle.
Oh,
Larry Boyle. And he is he was a past president, and now he's the vice president of the Chicago Society for Space Studies. And if you haven't heard of that, that's a society that promotes the exploration of space and educating the public about space exploration and the solar system. And they've been in existence since 1977. And it sounds like they have a lot of the same kinds of goals that we have as an astronomy club. Mr. Boyle is a retired reference librarian from the Franklin Park Library. He's a graduate of Rosary College and Loyola University, excuse me. And he's witnessed a couple of launches of rockets. He saw Apollo 17 take off from the Cape, and also the space shuttle. And that must have been very awe-inspiring to have seen. So this evening, the talk is going to be Space Year in Review. So the past year's events. And here again is Mr. Larry Boyle. Welcome him here. And Larry, I will go ahead and let you take it from here.
okay. I'm happy to be here, though I'm actually still at home. Let me see if I can get my screen sharing going. Okay, can everybody see the picture?
Yes.
Okay, so I do this basically every year, and I try to cover the highlights of what's happening on our planet in the various space programs that are in operation. There are actually quite a few of them. 72 different countries have space programs. Most of them are quite small, but they still do spend some money. There are 6 really that have full-size programs. The United States, of course, China, Russia, Japan, the European Space Agency, which we'll discuss a little later, and India. So it's estimated about $358 billion is spent each year on space. And that has to be an estimate because there's some military spending, and some of the private companies, of which there are several hundred at least, some of them are just on paper, some of them very advanced, don't always reveal all their spending for competitive reasons and the military for secrecy reasons. So it's probably around 358 billion, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And there are quite a few countries with satellites in space. This is a slide as of April. You see the United States has the most with over 1,300. And also most of them, 1,400 global satellites on Earth are actually commercial. That is private, profit-making satellites. Most of those are communication satellites. I thought I'd start this review with the private space companies, of which there are quite a few in the United States and all over the world as well. In fact, Wikipedia has a page on private space companies, lists them. And there are over 100 in various different kinds of categories, like building rockets, building satellites, launching astronauts, that sort of thing. So the biggest, at least the biggest publicity, well-earned publicity this year was with SpaceX. SpaceX is a company founded by Elon Musk. And this year, in May, they actually succeeded in putting a private space capsule into orbit. Now, this was the first time since the space shuttle was retired in 2011 that the United States launched a manned crew from an American rocket on American soil. From 2011 until this year, we had been buying seats from the Russians to get our people into orbit. So on May 20th, they had a picture-perfect launch. There were 2 people in this capsule called the Crew Dragon by the SpaceX company. And then after a few days, they docked with the International Space Station. And they really opened a new chapter in human spaceflight, because this is the first time that a private company had ever put people into orbit from their own private capsule and rocket. They actually stayed from May until August when they actually splashed down. This was actually the first time that a manned space capsule had splashed down since 1975. And it was off the coast of Florida and it went quite well. This was actually marks the last time NASA is going to have to pay the Russians for a seat on the Soyuz. I mentioned that we had to pay for them over the whole span of the 10 years almost. We paid for 71 seats. They started out at something like 20 million and they ended around 60 million a seat. And total, we spent probably about $4 billion for all the seats that we spent. And NASA, of course, is happy not to be sending that money to Russia. Why is this SpaceX system such a change? This slide is actually adjusted for inflation. So the numbers you see here are actually what they would cost in this year dollars. So you see that Apollo was 300 million and Space Shuttle 170 million. You can see it dropping down to Dragon is 55 million. So that's quite a drop in the cost of a seat to orbit. And that's one of the reasons why this is a critical first step for NASA. NASA also has an ambitions of creating a private space economy, one not dependent on government spending. And this another reason SpaceX is so important is that it is a private company. And while NASA is the anchor tenant, that is, they agree to pay a fair amount, SpaceX is free to sell this system to anyone who will take it. I mean, they wouldn't sell it to, say, ICE or Al Qaeda, but anybody else with the money, they will send it to. And they are looking towards space tourism. Now, there has been some space tourism in the past to the Russian space station, but there hasn't been much of that for the last couple of years. But now there's going to be more. So SpaceX actually signed an agreement to market the Crew Dragon capsule, and that has produced some results. The first private space mission was announced in January of this year, actually, with a price tag of $55 million for each seat. And they'll be launching sometime later this year. And then within a few weeks of that, another private space group decided to launch a space mission as well, a few months after the first one. And they have actually, well, they call it Inspiration 4 is the name for the mission. They're renting it from SpaceX. And they have decided that one of those seats will be available by a raffle. So if you donate money to St. Jude's Children's Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, that was the hospital founded by Danny Thomas, and they will put you in a raffle and you might win a seat to the International Space Station. And you can either go to inspiration4.com, which is the mission's website, or go to St. Jude Danny Thomas space flight, and that'll both get you there, in case anyone's interested in at least taking a chance and getting into space. SpaceX also has some really good technology. It actually, from about 1959 onwards, they wouldn't let NASA launch from the Kennedy Space Center from Florida in a polar direction. They're now so satisfied with SpaceX's technology that they've reopened that polar launch corridor from north to south, in addition to the east-west launches they were doing. SpaceX has a rocket called the Falcon Heavy, which is an upgrade of the Falcon 9 they're using for the Crew Dragon, and they got a mission to launch an asteroid exploration in 2022, an unmanned mission. So right now, SpaceX really dominates rocket flight. This is bringing big benefits to NASA. They're getting launches without spending as much money, but there's also some risks because SpaceX now has a vote on what happens in space for the United States. It's not just strictly a NASA thing anymore. Other people, including SpaceX and some private companies, have some say in what's happening. SpaceX has several other programs. They have something called the Starship, which is a heavy lift launch vehicle designed to take many tons into orbit. In fact, this system is designed to take people to Mars. They've been testing this for this year. They've had a couple of explosions, and they've been moving forward, and Musk seems to be satisfied with the progress they're making. And they scored other successes right after Crew Dragon returned for the first time. They actually had another success for the Starship launches. Musk has a plan to settle Mars. In fact, that's why he got into the space program, according to him. And he is building Starship to take people to Mars. And he's planning to do it sometime in the mid-2030s. Now, a lot of people think he's absolutely crazy. And I hope he succeeds. I'm not sure that he's going to. But that's why he's building these rockets. And he's not just talking about it. He's actually building the hardware to actually settle on Mars. So within 10 years, there may be a colony on Mars. Not one put together by any government, but one put together by a private individual. To pay for this, the space launching part of SpaceX can't generate enough money to colonize Mars. So they have a program called Starlink. And Starlink is designed to put many satellites into orbit around low Earth orbit to provide direct connection to the internet for the entire planet, basically. Right now they have about 800 of these satellites into orbit, and they're planning to, within the next year or so, to get it up to 12,000 satellites in orbit, which will make internet available to everywhere on Earth, every space, every person. And they expect that to generate enough money to pay for the Mars colonies. And I've always been interested in astronomy and in the space program. And I never thought the two would really be in conflict. But there is a lot of talk. SpaceX, they already have like 300, 600 satellites in orbit. And there's a great fear that this was going to interfere with astronomical observations. And they went to SpaceX, basically the Deep Sky Association, and asked them to do something about it. And they did put dimmers on, or a dimming coating on their later satellites, but it doesn't know that that's going to work perfectly. And Starlink is also threatening radio astronomy. There's going to be all this radio traffic from the internet going on, and there's quite a bit of fear that it will interfere with radio astronomers as well. Though Starlink and SpaceX really seem to be working to do something about that. Problem with that is that SpaceX has the most satellites, and it's the furthest along with their low orbit satellite swarms, but there are a lot of other people working on it. And this is potentially a problem for amateur astronomers and professional astronomers. There are going to be a lot of satellites, many thousands in orbit within the next few years. And they could, if the people responsible caused some problems with observing. In fact, people are worried that it will clog the night sky. And I certainly don't want to see that. I hope that SpaceX and all the others do something about it by coating their satellites or something. We'll have to see what's going to happen with that. And this is just a picture that shows the satellites after one of them they were launched. And so you can see that could be quite a problem if you're trying to take nice photos at night. And as I said, they do try to coat it, but it's still too bright for the astronomers, and there's still some discussion of what's going to be done. There are a lot of small rocket launchers as well. There's too many to talk about, but the most successful is a group called Rocket Lab, and they actually have a launching site in New Zealand. And they've managed to put up many different flights. They have a total of 65 launches, a very small, what's called CubeSats in orbit. So New Zealand actually has a orbital launch base. They did have some problems with one of their launches this year, but they recovered from that and they have now resumed their launchings. They have even gotten a mission from NASA to put a very small CubeSat into orbit around the moon. So this will be the first private mission that's being launched, a science satellite to the moon. There are some bigger private companies as well. When NASA first decided to go with developing a private crew system, they didn't want to be dependent on a single one. With the shuttle, whenever they had an accident, they were grounded for a number of years. So they wanted to have two completely separate systems. And they gave one of the contracts to SpaceX, which has now succeeded, and they gave another to Boeing. And Boeing is working on what they call their Starliner. And so far, what they've gotten is some nice pictures like this playing off your ride is here from Uber. And this is what it's going to look like when it's finally put into orbit. You can see this is a human to give you some scale, and it's launched on an Atlas rocket. And this compares it to, say, the Dragon and the other satellites, manned satellites that are in the world. They did have a test late 2019, and it didn't work too well. There was something wrong with their software. A lot of things apparently wrong with their software. And the investigation of this unmanned mission in December said that it was a really close call. If there'd been a crew on it, we could possibly have lost that crew. So they're going to be doing another unmanned test in the middle of this year. And then if that test is successful, then they'll do their first manned mission sometime the end of 2021. Another company, private company working on putting people into space is Blue Origin. Blue Origin is Jeff Bezos's company. He is the founder of Amazon and the world's richest man. And he started this company some years ago, kind of quietly. Blue Origin is funded by Jeff Bezos selling $1 billion of Amazon stock every year. So they don't have any problem with the stock market or banks or anything like that, because their sole stockholder is Jeff Bezos, and he funds it out of his own pocket. They've been testing what they call their New Shepard launch vehicle, which is designed to take few people up beyond the orbit, the official legal limit of space, beyond the legal limit of the atmosphere. It's called the Kármán line, and it's about 100 kilometers up. And once you've passed that, you're officially, at least legally, in space. They've been testing their satellite, or the suborbital satellite. And this is just one of the tests after it, like, you can see it has very big windows. In fact, it's the biggest windows of any space capsule ever. It's basically a tourist vehicle. And if you're a tourist, you're paying to get a view. So they made the biggest windows they possibly can. This here is actually just a crash test dummy. It's not an actual person for this test. Virgin Galactic has been working on a system somewhat like that for a number of years now. And they are moving with what they call their Spaceship 2. You can see here a picture of it is going in for a landing in one of its tests. And they'll be doing their flights from Spaceport America, which is in New Mexico. The person who started this company is Richard Branson, and he's been having some trouble with the COVID because his main focus of his fortune is a Virgin Galactic airline, or Virgin Airlines. And he had to sell his stake in Virgin Galactic for $500 million. So he no longer has a stock, but he still does run the company. He's still an officer. And so they're transitioning to operations. They expect sometime, maybe end of this year, maybe the beginning of the next, to do the first private commercial launches of tourists into subspace, at least. Other touristy information or private information, Tom Cruise and NASA have signed an agreement to actually shoot a movie in space on the International Space Station. Now, right now, there's no script for this movie. There's no schedule for this movie. There's no budget for this movie. There's just an agreement that it will be done. So this is another part of NASA attempting to create a private economy in space. And in addition to that, they've also set up some Estee Lauder products. That's a beauty company product. And the NASA astronauts are going to have a task of making basically commercials for these beauty products on the International Space Station. Some senators are a little leery of this. Is this a good use for this kind of time? But if you're going to build a commercial economy in space, you have to start doing things like that. That takes care of the commercial stuff, at least the highlights of the commercial. Moving on to the national programs. The biggest one is, of course, the one in the United States. It has two parts, NASA and the military. And NASA spends about $22 billion a year, and the NASA spends more. The military spends more. They are secretive about how much they spend, but they publicly admit to about $15 billion. And everybody in the aerospace press knows it's more than that. It probably actually comes up to about 30 billion just for the military. So we're spending around 40 billion in space. Moving to the one that has the most information, get the most pictures from, is NASA. And NASA's manned space program for the last many years actually has been focused on the International Space Station. And this year they had several missions, including the first one from the United States in a number of years. And the ISS, the International Space Station, actually turned 20 this year. That isn't the beginning of its building. That was a couple years earlier. But that's 20 years of continuous manned occupation of the International Space Station. So that's people been in space continuously now for 20 years. They put in a new toilet on the International Space Station. The female astronauts have been complaining that the toilet they had was designed with males in mind, and there's some difference in the plumbing between the two. No need to go into details. And the toilet was hard for the ladies to use. Now they've done one with some modifications that they hope will make it easier. Space Station had a persistent air leak, which they could not find because it was so small. They got the idea of tearing open a bag of tea leaves and just letting the tea leaves float around, and the tea leaves would floated to the air leak, and they were able to repair it. And I've mentioned that NASA has been spending money for the International Space Station, and this was the last time we're going to do that. So NASA is saving $65 million a seat, basically. The International Space Station does have a number of partners. The United States and Russia are the biggest ones, but there are a total of 14 different ones, and including some big ones like Japan, Europe, and we'll talk a little bit about those as we go on. The biggest manned program outside of the International Space Station for NASA is the Space Launch System and the Orion space capsule. These would be are designed for deep space exploration. And this is the Orion capsule. This is an artist's conception of an Orion capsule in orbit. They haven't flown yet. The first mission for them is scheduled sometime in 2022. And they are supposed to be able to use this to go to very deep space, to the moon and beyond. And there was some problems with this, of course, during the coronavirus this year. It's disrupted everyone's lives, including space programs. And the White House this year actually put a price tag on the SLS rocket. They expect it to cost $2 billion a piece, whereas the Falcon Heavy, SpaceX rocket, which it doesn't set up quite as much payload, but it only costs about $200 million a piece. So there's a big difference there. And the US also has a plan to put people back on the moon. It's named in 2019 and named Artemis. Artemis was actually the twin sister in Greek mythology of Apollo. So they thought it was appropriate to use the twin sister's name for this system. And they got their nice logo, and they've this year put up some of the details that they're going to have for this moon program. And you can see there's the Orion vehicle will bring it up to a space station in lunar orbit called the Gateway. And then they would go down from the Gateway down to the lunar surface. The Gateway and the Orion are all being built by government contracts, and they're working for a private company to build the lander. They had promised that the first person to land on the moon with the Artemis mission, supposedly in 2024, would be a woman. So that's going to be happening, hopefully, if Artemis stays on schedule. And they also decided to develop the human landers with private companies. And they actually selected 3: Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos's company; SpaceX, which is Elon Musk's company; and Dianetics, which is a big company for in the military area. And they have nice, pretty pictures. Though SpaceX is actually building the system right now. And that was probably one of the reasons why they decided to go with SpaceX as the main developer for the lunar lander. They want this program to be international. So they have what's called the Artemis Accords. And that's seeking international cooperation for this exploration. And they did get so far up to 7 countries have signed on to be part of this Artemis Accords. And they've established a blueprint for this international exploration, keep out zones for mining operations. They've actually set up a area around the lunar landers, the Apollo landers, as historic sites where people can't go without permission at any rate. The big elephant in the room is this: can NASA make astronaut by 2024? This was the goal set by the Trump administration. Now that the Trump administration is no longer in office, the question is, how much will the Biden administration do about this? And then just this month, the Biden administration announced that it certainly supports the Artemis program. The problem with this is that the White House press secretary had been asked the question, and she sort of just shrugged it off. And so the next day she came out and saying, yes, we're certainly in favor of it. So we'll see. Moving from the manned programs to the unmanned programs that NASA's been running this year, there are several things happened. Actually, a bureaucratic event was that NASA unveiled new rules to protect the moon and Mars from Earth germs. Why you want to protect the moon, which is known to be lifeless, is an open question. But protecting Mars is probably a good idea. It's very, very unlikely that there is life on Mars right now, but it's not completely impossible. It's like 99% impossible. And protecting that 1% is a good idea. From moving from the very center of the solar system, the sun, NASA has what's called the Parker Solar Probe. And this is a mission to get closer and closer to the sun and return data that they couldn't get any other way. And this year, they actually did their 5th closest approach encounter to the sun. And they returned some really good data, including this particular picture. Because they're so close, these things can't be seen from the Earth. And to be frank, nobody really knows exactly what this is. They're discovering new stuff they are working on getting an explanation for this. Moving beyond the sun to Venus. Venus made a lot of interesting, at least publicity this year. Scientists did find some hints of life in the clouds of Venus. And one of the few good things about these times with the coronavirus, where everybody's doing everything by Zoom, is able to sit in on the announcements that the scientists made about this discovery. And this actually slide is from their Zoom presentation. And they're very clear. They're not claiming they found life on Mars, on Venus's atmosphere. What they're claiming is they detected a gas, which is a mystery. This gas is either new chemistry or a possible life production. On Earth, this gas is only produced in swamps. The biggest place it's produced actually is penguin poop. And it's also a byproduct of meth labs, illegal meth labs. So it's possible that there might be, this could indicate that there's life in the atmosphere of Venus. Later in the year, some people reanalyzed their data and said, well, maybe not. And that's basically how science should work. There's still some discussions, and about the only thing that it's probably going to result in is a new mission, a new unmanned mission to Venus. The moon made some news in the US space program and more in others. There is more water and ice in the moon. Some of the NASA satellite observations showed that there actually is, it's very thinly diffuse, but there is putting a lot of water on the surface of the moon. They've known that there's water in the polar regions, but there's also seems to be some all over the surface. NASA, as I said, is trying to create a private economy in space. And as part of that, they decided to buy some lunar resources from private companies. That is, they'll pay the company, and the company then just uses its technologies to get whatever resources NASA wants. Mars was a big focus of the launches from the US and from others as well. In fact, there were 3 successful missions launched to Mars last year. One by the United Arab Emirates, one by China, and one by the United States. We'll talk about all of them as we go on, but I just wanted to mention this. And one thing that should be noted, the UAE, the HOPE mission, actually goes into Mars orbit on February 9th. That's tomorrow. They will be broadcasting it on the web. So that's something to look forward to. And the Chinese mission, which we'll also talk about a little later, actually goes into orbit around Mars on February 10th, on Wednesday. And then the US mission, which we'll also talk about a little later, arrives in February, on February 18th, so in about 10 days. So there's a lot of stuff going on Mars this month. And there are 8 spacecraft currently operating on Mars, and they will now be joined by 3 more within this month. And this just shows you what they are. There's one by India, the European Space Agency. NASA has 3 orbiters and a couple of landers, the Curiosity and InSight. Curiosity's been on Mars for a number of years, and it's been taking selfies and returning very good data. And while they were actually stargazing on Mars, the NASA Curiosity rover spotted Earth and Venus. So this is the first view of astronomy from the surface of Mars. And the COVID has also affected this program. So people are now driving their Mars cars from home instead of from the JPL system where they usually do it. The other mission that NASA has on the surface of Mars is called InSight. And InSight is not a rover, it's strictly a lander. And it was designed to look into the interior of Mars. It was basically a geology mission. And it has detected about 175 Marsquakes, I should say, in just 7 months. So it's really getting into showing the geology of Mars. It also had a thing called an InSight heat probe, which was designed to dig with about 6 feet down to see what the heat flow in Mars was. And when they got there, there's some kind of hard layer, at least in this area of Mars, maybe in the whole Mars, which has made it impossible to get that system deeper into the surface of Mars. So just recently they decided they're not going to be able to deploy that. Mars 2020, it looks, I think, a lot like Curiosity, and that's because it's virtually an identical vehicle to Curiosity. What they did, they decided instead of designing another truck, they would remove all the instruments that had been on Curiosity and replace them with newer instruments to do other things, but they would keep the chassis, the truck, so that Mars 2020 actually looks virtually identical to the Curiosity rover. And in March of 2020, they actually named this rover Perseverance, and it'll be landing, as I said, on the 18th. And it'll be carrying Ingenuity, which is a Mars helicopter. This is just a proof of concept. It carries only a couple of cameras, and they don't expect it to do a very great deal of flying. It has battery powered, and it's basically a test of concept to prove that you can actually fly a helicopter on Mars. And as I've been saying, Mars does arrive, Perseverance arrives on Mars on February 18th, and NASA intends to put that coverage on the web, and maybe even some of the news channels will cover it, who knows. Moving out from Mars into the asteroid belt, the OSIRIS-REx sample return mission, an asteroid sample return. And this year, they actually collected the sample that they were planning to pick up, and they were pleasantly surprised. And you see in this picture, you see these little dots and floating around in there. They collected so much material that it was falling out of the collector when they brought it to put it back in. And there was actually some fear that they might not be able to put the whole collector into the return capsule, but they did succeed in getting it in with this very large quantity of samples that will be returning in about 2 years to Earth. Beyond Mars and beyond the asteroid belt, there's Jupiter. And the US has a mission around Jupiter called Juno, been there for a couple of years. And they were aiming this for understanding the interior of Jupiter, but they also have a Mars JunoCam. And JunoCam is actually something that anyone in the public can go to the JunoCam website and vote on what they will photograph next. And they also automatically release whatever they've taken on the JunoCam to the web to anybody who wants it. And a lot of amateur astronomers have been using that to create nice, pretty pictures. This was an amateur picture of the shadow of Io on Jupiter. They detected some water vapor from Europa. They don't have a very big atmosphere on Europa, but there is some plumes, so that might make it easier to sample. Moving way out beyond Jupiter, the Voyager 1 and 2 are still going. They are now in interstellar space beyond the heliopause and beyond the terminal shock and returning data. Interestingly, the Voyager 2 will be on its own until well into 2021 because the NASA is upgrading the radio dishes, the Deep Space Network dishes in Australia that they use to communicate with it. NASA had to retire one of its great observatories. The Spitzer Space Telescope ran out of cooling liquid in January of this year, and so they had to retire it. And it was an infrared observatory and returned a lot of really good data. They're still working on the Hubble replacement, the James Webb Space Telescope, the mirror complete, and they've actually put it completely together, and they're doing final testing on it. And currently it's scheduled for October 31st of 2021 for the launch date. And there's still some question with the ongoing coronavirus if that might slip, but it looks like it's going to go after many delays in October. They have a satellite called the Terrestrial Exoplanet Survey Satellite, TESS, and this year, TESS actually found the first Earth-like planet in a habitable zone. They don't know that it's inhabited yet, but they do know that it's in that zone where it could be inhabitable. And Hubble actually had its 30th birthday this year and still returning a lot of good data. It's still in fairly good health and should probably continue for a number of years. They haven't completely abandoned infrared astronomy. The NASA renamed its next generation infrared telescope after Nancy Grace Roman. She was well known as the mother of Hubble. She was a scientist who worked in the NASA bureaucracy for many, many decades. And through all that time, she was pushing space telescope, space telescope. So to honor her, they've renamed W first, which you may have heard about, which is the Wide Field Infrared Space Telescope in her name. So now W first is from now on called the Roman Space Telescope. It's also the 30th anniversary of the Apollo 13 this year, or 50th anniversary, successful failure. NASA administrator discussed collaboration with the US Space Force this year, which brings us to the other big part of the US space program. And that's the military, the Department of Defense program. And as I said, they admit to about $15 billion and probably spend closer to 30 billion. And the big event was the launch of the space, building up of the Space Force. It's the 6th US military service. And it has a public budget of $15 billion. There's more in the classified budget, but they don't talk about the classified budget. This is one of the things they announced this year was their new logo. And it creates a stir because when people looked at that, they said this Space Force logo looks a lot like the one from Star Trek. And if you put the two of them together, you say, there is some resemblance. They're not identical, but there is some resemblance. So that was a little embarrassing for the Space Force this year. The Air Force has transferred 23 units to the Space Force. And there was some discussion in Congress, actually, about a Starfleet amendment. Basically, they had to decide, what are you going to call the officers of the Space Force? Are you going to use the Air Force designations or the Navy designations? And there are some people in the Congress that wanted them to use the naval ranks so that there would be admirals and captains instead of generals and colonels. The people who were actually manning the Space Force were originally from the Air Force, and they wanted to keep the Air Force systems. They did, in fact, win. So the new ranks that have been announced now, just this month, or just last month, will be the Air Force ranks. So there'll be generals and colonels and things like that. They announced a new motto in 2020. This is always above in Latin. All mottos have to be in Latin. And they also talked about sending troops to the moon many years from the future, but they are at least thinking about it. And the Pentagon Force has a vehicle called the X-37 Orbital Test Vehicle, and it's a very small space shuttle. And they launched it on its 7th mission this year, and it was launched for the Space Force. And they actually talked a little bit more about it than they usually do. You can see here, this is the X-37 compared to the space shuttle. So you can see it's a much, much smaller vehicle, but it's still in orbit doing interesting things. And even with the COVID pandemic, the first mission, it was a communications satellite, was launched by the US Air Force this year, or the US Space Force, I should say. Moving from the United States government programs to the second largest government program in the world, and that's the run of China. And China is competing very strongly in space along with everything else. And they had, just toward the end of last year, successful launch of the Long March 5 heavy lift vehicle, which is basically a competitor for SpaceX Falcon Heavy and the other large lift vehicles. They had a mission launch to Mars, which you mentioned briefly, and it was launched in July and is, as I said, coming up to land or to go into orbit around Mars this Wednesday. And whether they'll be covering that on the web or not, I do not know. China is sometimes very closed mouth about their space program. And they used the Long March to put this satellite toward Mars in, as I said, in July. And this is one of the most complex missions ever launched to Mars. This is the first time they're doing it, and they're trying to do everything at once. It has a orbiter, a lander, and a rover. And they will be the first country ever to put all that in orbit at one time. And it has, as I said, a complicated reentry program, and the rover won't be deployed until May. But as I said, it's landing on February 10th, and this Wednesday it will reach orbit. And they used this Long March 5 for various other things, including a space station, mobile laboratories, all sorts of very different things. And they also outlined plans for future manned crewed missions to the moon, sometimes in the 2030s. And they made the announcements about their international space station, or their space, it's not international, it's strictly Chinese. And they selected 18 new astronauts to help build this. They have had a small space station in orbit as a kind of test article, and they deorbited that in 2019, but they will start construction on this space station in 2021. So they're moving ahead with that. The Chinese also announced a 5-year plan for a reusable space station and a lot of commercial projects as well, though the details on these weren't all that great. They had a reusable experimental spacecraft. It did something, and they don't announce what it is, but there's something going on there. And this is an important breakthrough according to them, but they won't tell anybody what the breakthrough was. So it's still something of a mystery. And the Pentagon believes that China is amassing an arsenal of anti-satellite weapons. The Chinese, of course, don't talk about anything like this in their official press. So it's only the Pentagon and others that we have to talk about with that. They did have a moon mission this month, last year, and they have put a rover on the far side of the moon a couple of years ago, and it's still returning interesting data. And it was the first time anybody had put an unmanned rover on the far side, on the dark side of the moon. The sample return mission, as you can see, uses the Long March 5. You can see it was quite complicated in order to descender, and then it takes off from the lunar surface and comes back to Earth. And this was successful this year. On December 17th, it took about a week to do the entire system that I showed you, and they returned samples from the moon for the first time since 1976. So they are moving forward with that. There is certainly every indication that they want to do something like this sometime in the 2030s. Instead of having a photoshopped one from the Apollo, they want to put their own astronauts on the surface of the moon. And they're seeking human landing technology. And they've also, in a commercial area or semi-commercial area, they completed their Boyle system in June. And it's now fully operational. Boyle is actually a navigation satellite. There are actually 4 of these satellite systems in orbit. One from the GPS, which is the United States. The Russians have this GLONASS. The Chinese just completed their Boyle system, and the Europeans have actually also built a Galileo satellite navigation system. The reason for all these navigation systems is that while they have a lot of civilian uses, they were originally designed and their basic mission is still military. And nobody wants their military to be dependent on another country. So everybody, or at least 4 systems have been put into place. As I said, the Chinese probably have an operational ASAT program, including, according to a Congress report that came out in March. And they're also planning private companies. They have many private companies that are producing reusable sounding rockets, all sorts of things for their private system. Moving to another government space program in Asia, and that's the program of India. You don't usually think of India as a major space power, but it actually is. Spends about $3 billion US on its space program every year. And it's quite complex. They have an entire family of launchers. This particular slide was made for the use in the Indian market. So these HM ambassadors stands for Hindustani Motors Ambassadors. These were cars that are manufactured in India, and they're very popular in India. Everybody in India would realize what they are immediately. And they weigh roughly a ton for American audiences. So this one can put about 2 tons into orbit, 4 tons, and 8 tons on their various launchers. So they have a full family of rocket launchers. And they did the first launch in November 7th of 2020, after they'd been shut down for the rest of the year because of the COVID problems. They do have a orbiter around Mars, which has been there for 6 years and putting out some scientific data. They have a defense program in orbit. In fact, they became, in 2019, the 4th country to have actually tested an satellite, anti-satellite launcher system. So they're the 4th country with that, after Russia, the United States, and China. In 2018, the Prime Minister of India announced that India plans to have a manned space mission. And through this year, they did have some problems with the coronavirus, but they are continuing to work on this. So India's first manned space mission is now scheduled for sometime in 2022. In fact, they want it to be sometime around the 75th anniversary of Indian independence, which would be August 5th, 2022. So sometime around that time, you'll be seeing a private or a government Indian launcher putting a crew into orbit. Moving from them to another large Asian space power, and that's in Japan. And Japan has a full set of launchers and a full space program. They're actually, these H2s are what is working now, and they're working on an H3, which is again designed to compete against SpaceX. They have a laboratory on the International Space Station, which they spent over $1 billion building. It's been up there for a number of years. And big event in Japanese unmanned space exploration was actually they had a mission to go to an asteroid some years ago, and they actually collected samples. And in December of this year, the first time the asteroid dirt came home. So they landed it in Australia, and that's now on their way to their labs to be analyzed. Moving to what was the biggest government space program in the world until the Soviet Union collapsed, and that's Russia. Russia has been focused on the International Space Station, as the United States and most other big space programs in the last few years. And that tea leaf bag idea was actually thought up by a Russian cosmonaut. The leak was in a Russian part of the space station. They actually had to seal that capsule off because if there had been any astronauts in there, their heat and their breathing would have disrupted the tea leaves. As I said, Russia has a complete set of rockets, including the Soyuz, which was used to launch people, including Americans, to the space station. We've mentioned this a couple of times. NASA is no longer paying for the rides, which is good news for NASA. Russia publicly says, oh, so we're losing $200 million a year in revenue. It doesn't affect us at all. The ideas of the aerospace press is that, yeah, it probably does, and they just don't want to talk about it. They are building a new booster as well, and they intend to fly this sometime in 2021. It's another heavy lift launch vehicle, and it will be launching from their new rocket base, which they've been building for a number of years. When the Soviet Union broke up, their Baikonur launch base ended up in a foreign country. So they want to have their launch bases in a cosmodrome in Russia. So this is what they've been building, and they've launched a few rockets from there, but they're having trouble with that because of corruption. Putin, the president of Russia, really wants this project to go forward, but there's been massive theft, and they just indicted like 130 people for it, and that's been slowing down that project. This gentleman is actually the head of the Russian space program, and US has been trying to get them to cooperate with the Artemis program. They prefer to cooperate with China as a more worthy partner. They have tested anti-satellite weapons, and they did test a direct ascent anti-satellite weapon last year. So the space engine industry has been plagued with, of course, the pandemic, but they do have some private companies that are trying to go forward. Moving on to another government program, and the most unusual of the government programs, that's the European Space Agency. The European Space Agency actually formed in 1975. In that year, the various countries of Western Europe, France, Great Britain, Italy, Spain, Germany, realized no way we can compete with the United States and then Soviet Union. So they decided to pool their efforts and create the European Space Agency. And it is a formidable power in space, one of the largest ones, spending about $4 billion a year. After the Cold War, they actually expanded toward the east. These are new members that had been members of the Warsaw Pact, and these are just candidate members. So they're now up to about 22 members. They have a launcher system called Ariane, which is one of the most successful commercial launchers in history. The whole Ariane family has been going on since the 70s. And this is just the latest Ariane 5. Incidentally, Ariane 5 is going to be used to launch the James Webb Space Telescope in October. And they are also working on a new system called the Ariane 6, designed to be cheaper and to compete with the SpaceX systems. They did confirm that they were kind of delayed it, not going to take place until the second half of 2021. Who knows exactly when that's going to be. They do have a capsule laboratory at the International Space Station called Columbus. It's been up there for a number of years. They also spend about $1 billion putting this lab in space. They have formally joined the building the Gateway, which is the lunar space station, lunar orbit, and they'll be putting together parts for that. They also have some Earth observation programs. They have a program called Columbus, and they decided to fund it for a further number of years. And I also mentioned Galileo, their navigation satellite. They're having some problems with their space budget. They had to reduce it a little bit, cutting about 2 billion euros, which is about $1.5 billion. They were going to have a mission to Mars this year, but the instruments on their Mars rover, which they've named Rosalind Franklin rover, they just couldn't get them done in time. It was just too complicated. There were too many problems. So that's been delayed to 2022. They also have been spending some information or some time on the sun. They launched their solar orbiter this year. And in February, they got their first really close look to the sun. And this returned their first data in July of the closest pictures to the sun. And this is actually one of those pictures. This is the closest anyone's ever seen the surface of the sun. This is the United States, just to give you a sense of scale. And you can see this is what the sun looks like really close up. They launched a unmanned satellite telescope to study exoplanets. They're looking to try and find out more about the exoplanets that have already been discovered. As I mentioned, there are a bunch of space programs, 72, and there's just not enough time to go over all of them. But we should mention a couple. We've already mentioned this a few times briefly. The United Arab Emirates is a small country that's in the Persian Gulf. You can see it laid here, and they basically sit on an ocean of oil. So they have lots of money. and they decided that they wanted to diversify their economy. And one way to do that was to inspire their people, their young people, with to go into science. So they decided to have a space program, and they had the money to do it. And they aimed their first mission to Mars. As I mentioned, it will be into Mars tomorrow on February 9th. And they have announced that they will be broadcasting this on the web, or probably just the control center. We don't know exactly what they're going to be broadcasting, but you can look for that on the web. And as I said, this is just an orbiter. It's studying probably the atmosphere somewhat. They don't have any launchers of their own, and they don't plan to build any. So they went to Japan and brought one of their H2 launchers to put this into orbit toward Mars in July. And as I've been saying, tomorrow, February 9th, they go into orbit around Mars. So that's something to look forward to check on the internet for that. The other one to mention is in Iran. And Iran actually launched a military satellite this year. Iran's Revolutionary Guards are basically their fanatics, and they successfully launched a military satellite. They don't announce anything else about it. The aerospace press says it was probably some kind of spy satellite or reconnaissance satellite. So to emphasize again, this month, in fact, this week is big for Mars. Tomorrow, Hope from the United Arab Emirates goes into orbit around Mars. The day after that, on February 10th, the Chinese unmanned satellite goes into orbit around Mars. And in the 18th, 10 days from now, the US will put its Perseverance rover on the surface of Mars. So that's a kind of highlights of what's been going on in the last year in space. And at this point, if there's any questions, I can try and answer them.
Well, thank you very much, Larry. It's very interesting. And yes, I think we have some time to take some questions. Remember to unmute if you want to speak, so we can hear you then.
I have a question.
Okay.
You talked about all the satellites that are up there, lots
Yes.
and lots of them.
Yes.
Are they starting to, is there any chance they're going to start running into each other? Has that happened yet? Is that going to happen?
That has happened about 5 times in the last 6 years or so. So it is a problem. There's a lot of discussion about that. And there's also a discussion of what to do with the junk. There's about 1,000 or more satellites in orbit, but there's a lot of spent satellites, exhausted satellites, and just basically junk. And there's talk, we must do something about this. In fact, there have been meetings where everybody gets together and said, yes, we've got to do something about this. And one of the persons says, well, since you're so interested in it, I wouldn't want to take the glory of it from you, so you can pay for all of it. And then this person says, oh, I wouldn't want to get in your way, you can pay for it. So there's a lot of discussion, but very few people are paying for it. Actually, the European Space Agency has announced that they're going to try and have a debris removal program sometime within the next couple of years. So, other questions?
You were talking earlier about all the communication satellites up there, trying to give internet to everybody, and talking about darkening their surface so they don't show up.
Yeah.
Would that be a problem, knowing that trying to find some of these exoplanets, we're looking at the brightness of objects, of stars, as other objects, hopefully planets, pass in front of them? But if one of these passes in that direct sight, is that going to be a problem that we can identify?
That is exactly what the scientists are afraid of. And that's what they're trying to work, dimming something. They don't have a plan, a detailed plan yet, but that is exactly the kind of thing that they're worried about. And that is exactly what could happen. So I hope it will be solved. I don't know exactly how it's going to be solved. Other questions?
Are there?
Yes.
It's my understanding that the efficacy of the dark surface on the satellites
Mhm.
isn't working very well. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, they tried it, but it doesn't do that all that damn much.
Yeah, that the SpaceX did put some dimmer coating on its later satellites, and it apparently has dimmed them somewhat. But as you say, it's not enough to it's still a problem. It's still something that they're going to have to work on. And the other companies trying to put up satellite swarms or satellite constellations haven't committed to putting any dimmers on it. So it's a outstanding problem. I think the Dark Skies Association, our amateur group that's working on dark skies for many, many years, is really onto this, and they're trying to get this solved. Whether who knows if they're going to succeed or not? I certainly hope they do, but this is one of the things that's nobody knows at this point. But yeah, the coating didn't work as well as they had hoped, and so they're reformulating the dimmers, the coating or whatever it is.
The Starlink satellites, do they have small boosters on them to get to the orbit that they want to get to, or the position? And then what do they have to continue if they have to make any type of maneuvers?
They only have small thrusters to make any maneuvers. And basically the launcher actually puts them pretty much right where they're supposed to, or they hope that the launcher puts them pretty much right where they're supposed to be. And they have some limited maneuvering capability, but not all that much. Because they want to be very close to the surface, they will degenerate and go out of orbit quite quickly within a very few years. So SpaceX plans to keep launching these satellites continuously with some continuous improvements, both of the electronics and hopefully of the dimmer coatings as well. So, other questions?
Where will they be controlled? I mean, if it's going to be international internet or something like that, Wi-Fi, where's going to be the main control station at?
In the SpaceX, probably in the building where they build their rockets. They have a centralized, Musk believes in having people close together instead of spreading them out. So he has his manufacturing system for the rockets, the control center that he uses for the rocket launching, and apparently the control center for Starlink are all basically in the same very large building in California.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yes. I just thought about, I don't know if it applies to this that much, but during this past year, of course, we lost the big radio telescope for Arecibo that collapsed. And I understand China has a large one competitive to that. Yeah. Are there any other programs we know about to do any more radio astronomy?
There are a lot of smaller radio telescopes. China does now have the biggest in the world. In fact, it was bigger than Arecibo, even when Arecibo was still in place. I forget how long it is, several hundred meters. And it's also in a natural depression, the way the Arecibo was. And there are other smaller radio telescopes across the world. And they're working on improving those. So there's a lot of that going on and a lot of worries about how all these constellation satellites are going to affect that. Other questions?
Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions, I really want to thank you, Larry, for an excellent talk. And I'm going to, if I'm successful here, I'm going to try to save a recording here of the meeting and put that on our club website for folks that weren't able to join us in our club. I won't broadcast it generally, but I'll make it available to the membership that they can look at it. So again, I want to thank you very much. for an excellent program. We'll have to talk again in the future.
Yes. So if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to sign off and let you get into the rest of your meeting.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
that's fine. That's fine, Larry.
Okay,
We've
okay.
got some other things, and you don't have to hang on for that unless you want to.
Okay. Well, now I'll just let you have your privacy. So goodbye. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Larry. Very good.
Bye. Bye-bye. That was very interesting. I had no idea that there was so much going on worldwide.
Space is getting crowded.
It's getting very crowded, very fast.
Yeah, so much for time exposures, right?
It's going to get tougher and tougher. It's already, I'm always amazed that anytime I take a 20 or 30-second time exposure, about half the time I see a satellite, at least one satellite. Anyway, I guess I didn't really have much beyond that other than just basically talking about future activities and just talk about a few items here and address any questions that you folks may have. Our next meeting is going to be March 8th. And let me see here. I think I've got something I could share. I'll probably have trouble with this, but we'll see what happens. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so March 8th, 2021 is going to be our next meeting, 7 p.m. And we are going to do a Zoom meeting like tonight, but we are going to attempt to have an in-person meeting also at the Butterworth Center. And this last week, I went up to Butterworth Center and met with them up there, and I took my laptop, which is what we're using here right now, along with me and did a point-to-point Zoom meeting with my wife, Sarah, here, and that worked great from the library where we normally would meet. So we're allowed, I think, to have up to, 26 people meet in the library there. I don't think we should encourage that many people to come unless you're really enthusiastic about it. But for those of you that would like to come and socially distance, let's try that. We'll see if we can do the meeting from the library there. And if you don't feel comfortable with meeting in person, that's fine. You can check in with us here on the Zoom channel like we're doing here tonight. And I'll try to organize that and make it happen from Butterworth Center next time. The meeting that we're going to have, we'll have a business meeting, which is the boring stuff that we have to do as a club. Occasionally we have to talk about finances. We have to talk about other things that are oftentimes not quite so fun, like tonight's presentation was. But we'll try to get through that, blast through that real quick, get the business meeting over with. And then we're going to have what we call a smorgasbord, which is a series of small presentations by club members. So if any of you have topics that you would like to present, and I think we might have one already from Roy. Roy, you were going to have a talk, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Do you
I'm
want to
trying to decide whether I should try to come to the Ben Butterworth or try to do it from home. That'd be a question.
the internet is pretty good from the Butterworth, so if you want to come up and do it there, you're certainly welcome.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll let you know. Or I'm going to let Dino know the subject. probably this week or something. I've already got it written, but I can't think of a good title for it. So,
Okay. All right. Yeah. Let Dino is I think organizing the topics here. And Dino, are you online? I don't think Dino made it. Okay, but anyway, Dino, or you can email me too. Between the two of us, we'll get it organized. But Dino's going to be the facilitator for the meeting itself. So it's a smorgasbord, and we can probably have 3 or 4 or 5-minute talks, or maybe even a few more than that. If you've got a new piece of hardware, or you've got anything, some observations you made, bring them along and present them as a smorgasbord. Ali Nordic is working on a presentation as a constellation report about the constellation Orion, and we're going to work that in. So maybe that would count as one of the topics as a smorgasbord. So that'll be March 8th. And the other
Al,
thing, yes, is there a question?
I just wanted to make, given the fact that I think I saw 24 total participants tonight, with a few more people because some of those were more than one person per screen. But perhaps we should have some way to get a reservation count for people attending at Butterworth, so that we don't exceed their 26 and have to turn people away that had planned to come.
Yeah, do me a favor and just drop me an email note and let me know if you plan to be there in person. I would not encourage us to have a full-blown 26 members in the room. That socially distancing, that would be spread out quite a bit in that room. It's a big room, but let's not do that, at least this first time out. I think as time progresses here, it's going to get better and better with the virus situation, and hopefully we can open back up again this summer. But I know some of you have challenges with internet. Some of you have challenges using Zoom and would prefer to meet in person. I know we have a couple of club members that don't even have computers or access to computers. And I would like to enable them to participate in our meetings as soon as possible, if it's safe to do so. And I think it is, if they're comfortable with doing it. So send me an email note if you plan to be there in person. Otherwise, we'll just do it the same way as tonight, and no worries. The next thing I have here is, theoretically, we have an outreach session at Niabi Zoo on March 20th. And I don't know, we haven't talked about this in the board, and that's probably something we're going to have to talk about in more detail in our board meeting. That'll be I've got to schedule a board meeting here coming up in a few days. So board members, be thinking about that. But March 20th theoretically would be our first outreach for the season. And I don't know if we're ready to get back out there that early or not, with the virus situation the way it is, and the way the weather is in March. It's pretty iffy at best. So I don't know if we just want to cancel that one, or if we want to try for it, or just wait and see what happens. But put it down on your calendar, and let's see what happens with our public observing sessions. Does anybody have any comment?
Al, I have had several people ask me about when we're going to restart the Niabi public sessions too. So we probably need to get something out, and maybe some kind of news release maybe a week before that, so that somehow we can start advertising that if we decide to proceed that way. So
My personal Yeah, my personal opinion is that I think maybe we should wait on the March, cancel that one, and take a look at maybe April, maybe even cancel that one to let it get more people into being vaccinated and stuff like that, and better weather and everything. So, but we can talk about that in the board meeting.
Yeah, let's talk about it in the board meeting. You know, I agree with both of you guys. But I'd like to hear what everybody says. And I don't want to spend too much time here tonight on it. I just wanted to get it out there that I think sooner or later this year, hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll be able to recommence our public observing sessions. And the first opportunity is March 20th, and then April 17th would be the next one. And May 15th would be the one after that. So it's not all that far away. And then, so we have a meeting in April 12th, and hopefully we'll be able to do at least a partial in-person meeting there. I guess my intention would be to keep doing Zoom meetings for future PAC meetings, because I think that will be the thing that's going to enable us to draw in some of the speakers, like the guy we're going to have here April 12th it's going to be a presentation called Sky Watchers of Ancient North America by Bill Eisminger. And he's from Cahokia Mounds Museum. He's a former assistant site manager at Cahokia Mounds. So that should be an interesting meeting.
Al,
Yeah.
suggestion. How about in the future, continuing, have in-person meetings, but also have have them sort of a hybrid in-person and Zoom meeting.
Exactly.
So other people.
That's what we're going to do, Jerry. That's exactly what we're going to do, Jerry. That's a great idea. And we're going to try and do that here at our next meeting. And I think it'll work. If you want to come and attend in person, you can. We've got a big widescreen, flat screen TV in the Butterworth Center Library, and we've got good speakers in there, and we got a camera there and a microphone that can pick up people in the entire room. So if you want to come and just participate in person and watch TV, you can do that, or you can stay home and attend the way we're doing tonight. Is that your point?
Yeah, that was essentially what I had in mind. By the way, at the banquet this fall, will we have a very large screen available?
Yes. Yes, it's a very large screen. I think it's probably it's at least, I don't know, it's bigger than the one in my living room here. It's probably about a 60-inch screen or something like that. It's pretty good size. So yeah, that'll work, Jerry. And hopefully by then we won't have to be socially distanced either. Jerry, do you want to talk about your person that you've invited to to be our speaker at the banquet?
Well, actually, it's someone that I met her because she my late daughter and her husband were friends of this person, and she's the well, she's PhD astronomer at Apache Point, and I guess her main focus is being the actual hands-on person doing the actual measurements for laser ranging to determine the distance between the Earth and the Moon, or various points in the Moon, where the retroflectors have been positioned, and the accuracy is of the order of millimeters.
And her name is Dr. Russet McMillan, right?
Correct.
Dr. Russet McMillan, and Lunar Laser Ranging Project is the topic, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and my understanding is that Apache Point is sort of the place where much of the work is being carried on. Other observatories have done work and possibly are continuing to do so, but Apache Point is that's one of the main focuses at Apache Point.
Good. Okay. So that's October. That's our October banquet. And let's see, May 10th and June 14th would be also regular meetings. The May 10th meeting, you can see here, is going to be NASA solar missions, presentation by Zoom. Dr. Teresa Kucera from NASA Goddard. And the June meeting is going to be. Yes, go ahead. Was there a question? June 14th meeting is going to be the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. And let's see, I can't read the name there. Matt, what is it? Matt Will? Matt Will from ALPO is going to present that. And
Al?
yes.
Yeah, this the guy Matt Will from ALPO. Now, do they make dog food also? Is that the right guy? Would he know anything about this stuff? Just kidding. I'll mute myself and get out of here.
Okay. I don't know. There's a couple meetings that I missed here, and I'm not sure I can find them real quick. But one I wanted to mention is the November meeting. We're going to have a talk from Katie Melbourne. Katie Melbourne is a member or former member of Popular Astronomy Club, and she worked for NASA in the past, and now she's living in Colorado, working for Boyle Aerospace, and she's working on a PhD right now, and she's done some research on M dwarf stars. She's going to talk about that. So that's more hard astronomy related. And she's also going to give us an update on the James Webb Space Telescope, which hopefully will have been launched by that time, or she can give us an update about it. Anyway, she's been involved on that project while working at NASA.
You know, I think Zoom has really opened up tremendous possibilities for speakers.
Yes, you're correct, and that's why I think we need to continue to keep Zoom available to club members. Not only does it allow club members to attend when they couldn't otherwise, but it also allows us to literally, pick up speakers anywhere in the world and do it fairly inexpensively too.
But Zoom does have some downfall to the thing, though. The kids can no longer get a snow day out here in Oregon. They have to go to Zoom virtual learning. So that kind of cuts out the snow days.
Yeah, that's kind of too bad. That
Yeah.
they can't have the snowball fights virtually either.
Yeah, no, you can't. Al, I've got to take off here, so I'll get out of here and I'll quit with my bad humor.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks
Al?
everyone for attending.
Al,
Yeah.
before we leave, I just want to make one more comment. We still have a few people who have not renewed their membership yet. So if you received an email from me about a week ago or so, it was because you haven't renewed yet and were a member last year. So please check that. And if you want to stay a member, please renew.
Yes. If you find value in what we're doing here, please renew your membership. If you're on here and you forgot to renew, that's fine. Go ahead and do it. And we want to keep everybody going here in the club. We value everyone's participation. These meetings, I think, would be better if we could do them in person, but I think the outreach we're getting here, I don't know. Actually, there was quite a few people joined that were non-club members tonight. I think we had a couple of people from, let's see, which club was it?
Peoria.
We had a couple of people from the Peoria Astronomical Society, PAS, I think is what they're called. They joined in and they invited us to their meeting. And when I get the information on that link, I'll send that out too. And I think it'd be great if we participated in their meetings as well. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be a component of our future from here on out. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
The boys and I have been attending the last two, what is it, Michigan that had the Zoom meetings, the beginner astronomy.
Yeah.
It's been a nice review for them.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the Kalamazoo Astronomical Society.
Yeah.
And you've been attending those?
Yep, we attended the one this weekend and the previous one. So I think there's 3 more.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, want to make sure everybody takes advantage of that too. I think in reality, you could probably just about every day attend the meeting somewhere if you really wanted to. Does anybody else have anything they want to contribute?